One of the things that happens when a design is created in another program is it's exported out or saved in the DST format. But each program has its sets of machine codes. And since you may not know what program or how old or how new that program is that the original design was created in, you have to kind of look at what's going on in the design, and you may have to clean it up a little bit. So when you go to open a design made in another program in a machine format like EXP or DST, you're going to go up to this icon, which is Import, but you're going to click on the arrow next to it and go to Import To. Import To is going to bring in a DST file. And I'm just going to grab one of the files that I ended up with from a customer that was having some issues. And we'll start with this. In this design, you can see we've actually cleaned up some things, but you can see what's going on here. There's there's color changes, but not necessarily always trims. And, in this case, I've cleaned it up a little bit for that customer, so there are some changes. But we're going to look at what we can do if we have to edit something in this program. And then we're going to look at another design that has bigger issues. Okay, in this program, the first cell is going to be this letter A. And I'm going to go into 3D preview so you can kind of see what this is. There's the A. She's got this outline. There's a different color outline on the inside. And that's the way this design was supposed to be made. And then you have these other letters like this S, and you've got this A over here, and things are kind of all over. But more than that, maybe you need to edit this. Well, if I needed to edit this A and make some changes to it, other than like a color change or deleting a section, then if I right-click on it, the program's going to recognize it. It's, going to put it into the selection for editing. But when I go to make changes to it, even a fill type, I'm going to have some issues, because it is locked. So I'm going to expand this out again. See that lock right there? If you follow my mouse, that lock symbol means that I cannot make any changes to this area. It's not going to let me put a fill in. It's not going to let me edit it. It's locked to protect that area. So when a design has been made in another program or comes in a format that's not, the IDS native file, it locks these areas so that they cannot automatically be changed. If I want to change the area, the first thing I need to do is unlock it. And I just click on that lock and it's now unlocked. So now I can do editing. Now this, if you look at this, it looks like it's, a complex fill. But if you follow my mouse and you go down to the quick toolbar, even with that selected, there is no fill type selected here. Because it was made in another program, the program doesn't really know what fill type you want this to be. If you want to change the fill type, you can do it once you unlock it. Make sure you unlock. You can come down here and you can say, I want this to be a satin fill. And the program will automatically change that to a satin fill. If you want to keep it at a satin fill to keep the shape of the letters, but you know that that's too wide, you can go into your object properties. And if you follow my mouse, you'll go up to the object property setting right here. And you click on this and go to your satin tab. The reason you would want to keep that property for any letter, rather than just making it a complex fill straight across, would be to keep the flow and the shape of the lettering. Okay, so you would want to keep it as a satin, but if it's too wide, you would go into your satin tab at the top of the properties box and enable a satin fill. Now I'm just going to apply this. So now that has a satin fill in it. And for the A, it probably doesn't make too much of a difference, but when you have S's or O's, it's going to make a huge difference on the flow in your letter sometime. First, you have to unlock it, and then you can make changes. You can, apply a fill type to it, and then you can edit the outline. For example, if I wanted to really edit the shape of this, I could now go into my editing tools, which are at the top if you follow my mouse. There's the View Outline tool. And if you go over a few, there is my edit mode. And I'm just going to kind of grab some of these nodes and just pull these out. And we'll go ahead and generate those stitches. So now I'm able to change that shape. To give you a point of reference, I'm going to come over here to this orange section, which is the same letter. It's just locked. If I try to edit without unlocking, I can go into my view outline. I can go to my, edit mode, and I can pull this out in the same fashion. And when I generate, you can see there's the outline that I've changed, but no stitches have changed there. Even if I come down here and say, well, let's go ahead and make this a complex fill, it tells me that it's locked, and I'm going to say go ahead and do it anyway. And there really isn't much of a change there. It's not changed this outline at all. And the reason is that area is locked and it's protected. So if I unlock it and generate, I will see any of the changes that I've put into place on this design. Now these letters are going to be a little bit different because they are one piece. So you can see there's one piece right there. The border is included on that, and in this case, what you may want to do if you really had to edit this, or if you really wanted to remove the border, it would be just as quick to locate the font, do a search, and look for, somewhat of an athletic font, and just redo it that way. Or to use your manual punching tools and repunch it, because once you've added the outline in as one color, exporting it from another program is going to lock that as one piece. If I, for example, change this D, unlock this D right here, and then change it to a complex fill, you can see the outline is now included in that. So, I would probably in this case look for that font and just create the font in the size I needed. But that's kind of some of the basics of when you bring in a design. And, I wanted to make sure you knew you had to unlock and that you had to assign a fill type. So let's go ahead and I'm going to close this and let's take a look at one of the other problem designs that I've received in. So I'm going to go ahead and import this. And we will take a look at this one. And this one's going to take a while to open because it has a lot of bits and pieces and about 72 color changes. So we'll give this a second. There we go. Now, what this customer had done was take originally this first little dinosaur. And she kind of had it right, except that she merged these all together into one piece rather than, just taking one dinosaur and making this a little more logical. And then she added, each dinosaur individually until you have hundreds and hundreds of pieces, which you would still have, but you also have 73 color changes. Unless you had to have that many color changes, there really is no reason to do that. But there's other problems as well, because this first piece that was copied and pasted all the way through this, and it was not edited in the first place. So if you look up here, here's the first section. That's a running section for all of these pieces. Then there's the little dinosaur spines here, and then here's little dinosaur body, and everything's good. You've got color changes here, which are going to kick your trimmers. And then you come down to another piece of the dinosaur, and if you look, your in and out points are way up here, and then when you come down here, the in and out points down there. Okay, well, you could do a couple of different things here. You could unlock that, make it a satin, and change your in and out points, or you can let your machine trim, and you can just click on this little run line right here, and you can see, let me zoom in so you can see that that is a long jump. If you don't remove these and put your trims in, when you have a design that comes in like this, what you're going to have is that long jump. Your machine's just going to see it as one very long stitch. So left click on one of these little lines, double check that that's what this is, and then press and hold your control key and press the delete key. And when it says this is locked, just say yes, you want to get rid of it. So now what you see are those dashed lines. That indicates that there's a jump there. We want it to trim, so I'm going to come back over, widen up my sequence view again. I'm going to come back over here, and I'm not going to put a color stop in. That stop sign is a color stop. I just want to put a trim here. So you can see that dashed line disappears. If I move this, see the dashed line right here? If I place a trim in, which is a machine code to trim the thread and then move to this, you can see that disappears. Now I have this section too with it. It has dashed lines, but it is showing up as a section. So I'm going to do the same thing. Select it and press Control Delete and say yes, delete it. And then I'm going to put a trim here as well. When I come down to, the little green feet here, the next thing are, they're going to be like these little arm pieces up here, right? Same thing, I'm going to put a trim. I want to get rid of this little blank section, which indicates the jump. And, quickly remove that. Now, I would do this in stages where I would look at this and say, okay, there's that piece. I know this piece needs to go. And I would just slide through here and hold my Control key and select these pieces. And let me zoom out so you can see everything. Then I would just press Control Delete. And you can see the multiple highlighted lines here flashing, and remove them all at once. Now this design would be very difficult to do that with because of the way it was created. You could search through a design that was a little more organized and remove all of those things. Now I'm going to go ahead and just delete those pieces. What I would do with this design at this point, I would probably take all of these out of here. The first one's pretty good, so I can do it very quickly. I can come over here and there's the running stitch. I might have to recreate those, but if I scroll down, I can pretty much find the, finishing parts of that dinosaur, right? I would select this and scroll down and begin holding my Control and deleting these sections that I don't want until I just had one dinosaur, and then I would correct this dinosaur and then copy and paste these across and color sort. But I'm going to kind of save that for maybe another lesson. I wanted you to kind of see how to handle those jump stitches. And you can see even on this, there's a lot of problems here because those trims were not put in and these were all merged together. So I'm going to hide that just so you can see. I've got this little dinosaur pretty well cleaned up. I might double check and put a jump in here, or a trim in there, I'm sorry, to, make sure I can kind of eliminate a lot of those jump stitches in a design that's important. So I hope that makes sense. So if you guys have any questions on that, let me know, because I'm going to go ahead and close this guy out. And we'll start looking at how to handle when you get a very bad image. I'm going to go ahead and go to Create. You can go to Create in your menu to insert an image, or you can come over here to this little apple icon to insert an image. And we'll go to Insert Image. Okay, now we're going to work on this one, which we did earlier, but I wanted to show you some of the other things I get. That was actually one of them. Then I ended up with a patch. And these are the things that you get from your customers. If you talk to your customer and they have, like in the case of this patch, talk to your customer, surely they have their logo on, letterhead or something that you can at least scan into the computer. Working from a patch, unless it's perfectly flat, you're not always going to get the proportion that your customer wants. This was actually a picture of a card that somebody was going to have made up, and they sent this to somebody to digitize and wanted their logo put in it. So, you guys kind of get these odd things. This one actually is one of the easier ones to work with, to be honest. And, we may look at that one first this time. But, when you get bad images, don't be afraid to ask your customer, do you have this, logo on print? Do you have, a better image? If not, give me your letterhead and I'll scan it. Or, ask your customer what font was used. And we are going to do several lettering lessons so you can learn how to handle these odd fonts that you sometimes see in a logo, and how to handle like arcing like in this long leg one. But I'm going to start with something a little bit different this time. Earlier we kind of started with a harder design, and we're going to work on that as well. But for right now, we're going to start with this one. This one's pretty simple. When you open up an image in your program, you can see, I have all these things listed that I have on my computer. I actually have Corel on here too, but for some reason it didn't show up in this listing. I think I have to reinstall it. I'm not sure But, you know, if I want to edit this, like some of you I know this morning said you guys had Corel and you were comfortable in Corel, this is where you do it. You can take that image right in from here. Now, if you're comfortable with your editing program, honestly, you probably will just open the image and take it in there as well. But that's what this screen is for. When I edit a logo, which I very rarely do, to be honest now, inside of Illustrator or Corel, I just open those programs. I don't go through this interface, but I wanted you to know what this is for. And like I said this morning, this is my line of thought on editing a logo that I get. Unless it's severely deformed, like at a skewed angle or something, most of the time it's faster for me to just manually punch a logo than it is to take it into Corel or into Adobe to, you know, recreate it so it's a vector image. You know, you're going to have to decide what works for you. If it's faster for you in Corel, then do it in Corel. If it's faster for you to learn the manual punching tools in the program, do it in the program. But the tools are very, very similar. So the size is kind of big. I don't really need 500 by 500, but if I look at this image, it's pretty square. So, you know, I'm going to go ahead and make this 250. If I have to resize it, then I do. If I don't ever want to see this because I'm going to manually punch things in the future, you can put a check mark here and it'll bypass this screen. When I click next, I go into the image processing. So, you know, here's my image. It says it's scanned because it's a JPEG, and it probably was. But because it's a JPEG, it's got certain attributes to an image that kind of degrade the colors on the edges. And that's why it comes up as scanned. It's not simple artwork. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert this image as a template. And then I'm going to resize after inserting is checked. I'm going to leave that alone, and I'm just going to say OK. And you can see in my image size, it was 500 by 500. When it, you know, goes into this image processing, you know, it's taking a look at the DPI and it's resizing it. So, you know, I might want to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger so that I can see the detail. So always double check what this size says versus what the other image processors, you know, that first portion says. It's looking at the design image in a different way. This is looking at it as, you know, an image to be processed through. So I'm going to go ahead and put the image in. I resized it, and it comes in faded. It fades out so that you can see, you know, to manually punch. That is the reason it comes in faded. I'm going to go ahead and increase the, you know, color, or unhide it or unfaded, I guess is the best way to put it, but increase the color density by pressing the plus symbol on my keyboard. If I want to decrease that because, you know, it's harder to see when I'm manually punching, I press the minus symbol on my keyboard. But you can see, you know, even though on the image that looked blue and, you know, this looked more green, you can see because it's a JPEG what's going on. Now, when I look at this image, I think, you know, I could go find the font and pretty much do this. This is a pretty simple logo to look at. When a lot of the newer IDS people look at this, they start to panic because it looks very complicated to work with, but it's really not. This is a C, this is U, L, T, U, R, E, culture. That's it. And then these are just very simple shapes. This looks like a very narrow Arial font. It's a real basic font. So the quickest way to probably look at doing this logo would be to come over to your lettering program. So click on that A. And if you don't have the Arial, narrow Arial font on your computer, you can do a search online. Just be careful when you go to some of the free font websites that you know what you're clicking on. So I'm going to say, you know, Arial narrow, and I'm just going to type in all caps the word culture. And I'm not going to worry about the size right now. I'm going to go ahead and say, you know, go ahead and insert that into the image. If this is the actual size the logo is going to end up being, then, you know, hey, I'm going to go ahead and resize this. If I just drag on one side, you can see it kind of just drags one, you know, way. If I hold my shift key, it scales it from the center. Okay, so, you know, I just want to get about the size of these letters. Okay, and these are all scattered around, so trying to just find one size is always a good thing. And to do that, I'm just resizing by dragging, you know, this way. These are a little bit wider than what the original logo is, and there's a little bit more curve here, but I would not want to make this narrow. This is going to be very narrow as it is, but making it a letter this narrow and then shrinking it down to a 4-inch size is never going to work. So we're going to go ahead and leave this wide, but to get the letters where I want them to go, I need to ungroup them. And you're probably wondering why I have no stitches in there, and I forgot to do this. So I'm going to put the stitches in, and I'll explain why I had no stitches in there. When you are working with images or you're working with the design, a lot of times it's easier to stay in wireframe and then just generate your stitches at the end. So in your program, there is a view option and there's a view preference, and your default has this checked. So if that's checked and you remove this check mark, you're going to work in wireframe and you're going to have to create your stitches every time you want to see them. So I'll go ahead and leave this open for right now, or leave that check for right now, but you'll see why that becomes very handy in our next design. So I have culture created. It's about the size I need, and I'm going to ungroup these letters so I can begin to move them around. And to ungroup the letters, I just left click on this and come down to this icon. If you follow my mouse down, there's this group ungroup icon here. There's, the Control G is also your keyboard command. So I'm going to ungroup these. And what that does is it allows me to move these letters individually. And I'm going to move a couple of them out of the way because now they're just individual things. I can, resize them individually. So I can take this C, line it up about where I need it to go, and I can just stretch this across and resize that to about the size I need. And if you're not sure, this is where the wireframe kind of comes in handy. Go up to your view outline and you'll be able to see everything underneath. And, that looks pretty centered. I might nudge that over just a little bit with the arrows on my keyboard, but that looks pretty centered to that. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the U. I'm going to drag it over here. And working in wireframe allows me to see what's going on. And I'm going to resize this U to fit, how I need this to fit. And I'm just going to wait till I get the double arrow and, kind of drag that to the size I need. Same thing with the L, just move it over here, line it up. And because these are a little bit wider, I might adjust a little more. Just make sure that they're touching slightly. And I'm going to do that with each letter. Pick a spot where it's easy to line these up and resize them as needed. You can see I've got a little overlap here, but we'll deal with that in a minute. And if you have one U, like in this case we had 2 U's, right? If you've already sized one U, delete the other one, select that one, copy it, paste it, and then bring that U down at the correct size. And then you don't have to worry about resizing it a second time. With the R, I'm just going to adjust this. And you can see these kind of move into each other, but I have to be careful how much I adjust the R, because what I really need is this piece up here, and we're going to edit. And the same thing with the E. I'm going to bring it over, and I'm just going to resize it. And I'm not going to worry about the overlap because we can remove that very quickly. So there's my E. And when I'm all done, I'm just going to left click off to the side, nothing selected. I'll generate and put the letters back into position. Now, I'm going to edit this a little bit. But you can see, the C's there. I might want to make it a little more fluid. If I go into wireframe and look, that is a little more fluid into that. So, I'll make that C a little more fluid into the U. I'll make the L maybe, or the U, a little more fluid into the I. But what I want to do is, make these blend in like this does. So those letters are a little more fluid. Okay, Gail's asking why I wouldn't bring this in as simple artwork instead of a template. If you look at the green here, that's got some brown, it's got light green, it's got, really mossy green, it's got that, and the blue's the same way. It's a very pixeled image. Scanned images or JPEG images are generally not very good quality images unless they've been created in a vector program and export it that way. So bringing that in, I would have, just as much work here. Even the black is not really very good, and my lines would have been too narrow to actually be good lettering. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that and, make these adjustments. I'm going to make these minor adjustments to make it flow like the rest of this. Okay. And then I'm going to edit. So let me go ahead and close off the questions real quick, and I'll generate and I'll show you what's going on. So now I've got the C lined up pretty good. This is what we look like in our 3D preview. The C's lined up pretty good. I might edit a little bit. That's running into that. This is running into that pretty good. This is looking pretty good. This might need to be adjusted a little bit. And then from here, I'm just going to start chopping things out of this. And it's very easy to do. As long as you're happy with the way this looks, if it's lining up with your image, now it's time to go into editing mode. So when I go into editing mode to clean this all up, I'm going to come over here to my view outline. So if you follow the mouse up, I go to view outline. And I'm going to start zooming into areas. Right here is where I'm going to start. You can see where the C comes in here and doesn't meet up quite right. So right click on the C. Since this is pretty basic right now, and I just need to move a node first and then clean some things up, I'm going to come up to edit mode. And I can just simply take this and pull it in. I need to make sure that these lines are flowing the way they need to flow. This is close enough, even though it's not perfectly lined up, this is close enough to a logo or to this logo that it's good. Now I need to get rid of this. I don't need the overlap, I just need things to flow into each other. So to get rid of that, I'm going to stay in my edit mode. I can be, shaded like this, or I can have the node showing, and I'm going to use my editing menu. To access the outline editing menu, you can come up to your main menu up here where it says outline, or you can right-click on the piece that is selected and access the same menu. When you are in outline editing, what that means is that you're going to reshape the outline of your area. That is a reshape tool. I can create voids or holes. I can slice things away. I can do, anything that changes the shape of this letter or this area. And in this case, we used divide with a line earlier. We're going to use that again in the other design, but in this case, I would do divide with a curve. Divide with a curve is not really a curve. It's, a combination. If I left click, I get a straight segment. And when I right click, I begin to get curves. So something like this, I'm not going to cut it right on the edge. I'm going to come through here, and as I need to curve, I'm just going to right click, and I can put multiple points here, but I have to come back to the outside of this area I'm cutting away. Okay, so I started off on the outside. It's like cutting with scissors. You start on the outside and cut through something not right on the outline. So, here I am. I'm just going to leave a little bit of an overhang, and I'm just going to right click to navigate the curve of the U, and I'm going to come down here and go on the outside of this red outline for the C I selected and press enter. Now what I have are two pieces. I have this piece and I have this piece that's hiding underneath the U. To get to the piece underneath the U, just generate, and there's the piece I want to get rid of. So I'm going to, either come over to the film strip and left click on it, because you can't really get to it in a right click right now because this is sitting on top of it. So find the piece in your film strip, left click on it, press and hold Control, and then press your delete key to remove it permanently. So now I've cleaned that up very well, and that's flowing very well. So I'm going to go back to view outline, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. When I look at this L, this L is actually going to sit on top of the U. I might change the stitching order, but I have kind of the same problem here. Here's where my L is. I need to adjust it into that U, or I need to make the U wider. And since this is really flowing into the U, I'm probably going to just go ahead and adjust this L. And you can see I probably need to adjust a little bit here as well. So, I can do it a couple of ways. I can, left click on it and, pull this down and resize it. I could resize that spacing there, right? I could, pull it over this way a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and undo that resizing because there's other ways to do this. Or I can use the editing tool. So I'm going to right click on this. If I want to just see the L so I can edit it better, I'm going to zoom, here's your zoom toolbar. This zooms in, that zooms out. 1-to-1 is when you totally lose your design on the screen, but you know it must be there somewhere, but you're stressing that maybe you deleted it. Hit 1-to-1 and it'll center that design. This zooms the entire design, and this is going to zoom what you selected. Let me move my toolbar back. So I'm going to zoom selected. So now I'm right up on this L, and I can see what I need to do pretty clearly. So let's go ahead and, I'm in my view outline mode. Remember, outline is what you use to reshape something. And I'm going to come over to edit mode. So now I can, drag that over for right now, which means I can kind of align that a little bit better as well, straighten that out a little bit. And I might want to make this a little bit wider just so the letter looks a little more even. So I'm just going to pull these nodes. These are very simple shapes, so I don't have to worry about any other tools. I just have to try to keep those lines pretty straight. So now I've got this pulled over, and I'll just line it right on the edge of that U. And if I can't really see, like here it's dark and I can't really see, I can always, go up to turn off your image so you can see your outlines better. So I just want to make sure that lines up well, that this is pretty straight, that these are pretty even, and I'm not going to worry about the length here. We're going to do something else that allows us to make sure those line up in a minute. I just want to make sure that this is going to allow me to cleanly cut here. So I'm in View Outline, I right click, and I get to divide with the curve again. Or I could try Create a Void, and it would, cut that off with, this portion. But dividing with a curve is going to allow me to come up here and leave a little bit of an overhang as I divide this piece away. So I'm going to hit enter. Now that piece is divided. Now if I were doing this design on my own, I wouldn't stop and generate all of these pieces and remove them, but I want you to see what's going on. I would just do this all at the end. But we're going to go ahead and I'll zoom out to the whole design. And I'm going to right click off to the side and generate. And there's my other piece. To get rid of that, I press Control and hold the delete key. Okay, now I know that this U, really should sit on top of this L. So I'm going to just keep my design organized and left click on this L in my stitch sequence viewer here. And then I'm going to press and hold my left mouse button over that L and drag it up into a new sewing position. Okay, now this is kind of the beauty of the program here. Here's my C, I moved the L, and you can see, as I click on these where my in and out points are, right? And, there's a jump because, that's been moved. This is now in a different position. And if I right click off to the side and I generate, or say go, the program recalculates my in and out points, and it makes a travel stitch here over to the L. Then it would come back to the U. And these three letters have no jumps to them. The reason that they have no jumps or no trims there is that the program's routed them so that they don't. Even though you have trimmers on your machine, if you can avoid trimming, it's a much more efficient and quicker design to stitch. So I'm going to stop for a second. Let me see if we have any more questions. I'm going to change this color mainly so you can see these stitches a little bit better. And I don't know if that's a better color or not. Usually kind of a lighter blue works. We'll go there. That's not very good either. I'm just trying to make sure that it shows up well when you guys look at this in the video. And, it's kind of tough to see on my screen with that dark color. Okay, I'm going to zoom in around what we've edited. Okay, this is what we got. The C is going to go first. It's going to travel over to the L. It's going to do the L, and then it's going to come back and do the U. Okay, that is a good stitching order, even though, my next letter over would be the T, and it would seem kind of logical to, maybe, do that T last, maybe. But when we're all done, we can look at this order and reset it if we want to. I just kind of wanted to show you that, in fact, if you think about how the design's going to stitch and you relocate things or reorganize things, that you can make a much more efficient design. All right, so I'm going to turn my image back on so we can see what's going on. And, I now have to look at, are these letters lining up? And, the U is always going to have a little more to it. They look pretty good, but, I might want to make sure that they're lining up and, just turn off the image and check my grid if I need to later. But, we've got these 3 letters done. Now let's look at what's going on with this T. And if I go back into outline view, I can see that, the T needs to line up and it kind of runs into that L, but it needs to line up with that L. And this letter seems a little bit higher, so I probably could just left click on that to select that letter and nudge it down. And visually it's looking pretty good with this E. I might shrink it just a little bit from the top down. Now I've got this L to worry about, right? This one is going to be, pretty cut and dry. I'm going to go to edit mode so I can see. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go ahead and say divide it with a line, and I'm just going to chop from here slightly inside to here. And if you make a mistake, just backspace, just give yourself a little overhang and press enter. And again, if I generated, I'd be able to pick up that little piece right away, but I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, now I have the U and the T. And, I've got a little bit of a problem, so I'm just going to click on this, and, I can quickly kind of pull this over to match that U. The U is a little wider maybe than what I want it to be, but not significant enough that it would probably show up in my stitch out. I'm zoomed in 290%. So that's not very significant, but I do have some issues over here. And, I'm going to have to look at that. The same thing, with this U. I'm not even going to bother editing this U right now until I get, this R and the U resolved. So I'm going to right click on the R, and I'm just going to kind of drag that line over on this R and come up here and adjust it. And, if you need to adjust that a little bit as well so it looks the same width. And make sure that this is lining up, with that U so that it all kind of blends in together. And if you need to, come up here and adjust the, that so it's a little more straight. See, now I have, this in a position where I can really edit it fairly easily. And I'm going to start with this U. I right click on it to select it, right click again, and I can say divide it with a line. If I wanted to divide straight across, I could just divide straight across in one swoop. So I could left click here and then drag it straight across and make a straight cut all the way through this. That would cut that there, and then I would just have to edit the R. So I'm going to go ahead, so that looks pretty even, and just press enter, and now I've got this U sliced, but I have to deal with this R. My tool is still on, so I'm going to press escape to turn off that tool, and I'm going to move over to the R. The R has some issues. It kind of runs into this E a little bit funny, so we have a little more editing to do on the R, and we're going to do that a little different, but in the meantime, right now we just have this slice, and I know that I need to slice it about here, so I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to divide it with a line, and I'm going to, remember I cut this U off here. This piece is going to be taken out. So I'm going to just work from here and just leave a little tiny bit of an overhang because those should run right into each other very well. And I just slice that R. Now this is the section that really needs to be edited. And, some of it I can just kind of come over here and just move this a little bit, delete those points, right click on them to delete them, and I can get that, pretty straight because we know we're going to cut this. If I need to curve it a little bit, I just right click on the line and I can curve or uncurve this line. When I come over to here, it's going to be a little more complicated to edit because I need to line this up with this so it blends into that very well. So we're going to do this. Right click, and we're going to say adjust with new points. When I adjust with new points, I'm going to tell the program where I want to begin the adjustment by going to the outline and left clicking. And there's my little green node indicating where I want to start. And then I'm going to tell this where I want it to end. And since I want to edit this whole line, I'm going to come over here a little bit and say end my editing there. Now when I mouse over, I want to mouse over the line I want to edit until it highlights turquoise and left click. This becomes attached to my mouse. So now I can say, we're going to really reshape this like this. I'm going to left click here, and then I'm going to right click down into this E. You can see the adjustment. If you make a mistake, just backspace. You can backspace all the way back to the beginning. But once you select that line, go back to where you wanted to begin editing and begin reshaping your item. So I'm reshaping this section. That's a little bit longer than probably what I need. So just backspace, left click to line up with that E. And then I can right click and very easily shape this the way I need it to be based on my image, and I press enter, and now I've reshaped this piece very quickly. And if I'm worried it's going to be too thin, I can do it again. I can say, from here to here, that part's pretty good, but I'm a little worried about this section, so let's go from here to here. And I can just reshape this as much as I need and make that adjustment if I don't feel it's correct. And sometimes that's faster than doing the node editing when it's a complicated area. Okay, so I'm going to escape out of my tool. I'm going to zoom the entire design. And what I have is looking pretty good so far. Now I'm going to generate after all that editing. And I'm going to find these little pieces. There's the little piece I'm going to get rid of. And I just left click on it in the film strip. See? Hold your control key and come down to the next little piece that needs to go. And you can see these little pieces all the way down here. You know that those are the pieces you sliced away. So just hold that control key and left click on them, and then continue to hold the control key and press delete. Now those are all gone, and what I have is maybe a little more editing here. I might adjust this width a little bit, but my design is running into itself pretty well. That's going to just continue on if I have the stitching order set correctly. So I have the C, the L, the U, the T, then I have the R. And I might look at this order and think, wait a minute, this U should go next. So I'm going to drag, just left click on that U, select it, press and hold your left mouse button after you select it, and just drag it to a new position and press go. Now, personally, I would want the T probably to be on top. So we're going to look at how to reorder a design, but I wanted to show you quickly how to move things around if, you wanted to make sure that something's stitched properly. So when I look at this after it's generated, there's a couple of things that I see. A, I don't like the way the T stitches, after the U. And this R needs a little more editing. So I'm just going to come in very quickly. And, I've reshaped this pretty good. So I'm just going to right click on the R now. I'm going to go to outline because that allows me to adjust my outline, and then edit mode. And I'm just going to move these over. And if you have to, right click on it something and delete it to get rid of them. Because really, all I have is a very gentle curve here. I don't need those points. I can just right click on the line and move it. I can move this point down if I want to, and I can right click and delete anything that really needs to be moved very quickly out of my way. Okay, so I made that a little bit fatter. I might adjust a little more into here. And I'll just double check these things to make sure that, they're lining up on these outlines. And if you're worried about the T, you can right click on the T in this mode, and you can make this top portion just a little bit wider. Just drag them down. No big deal. And make the bar of that T just a little bit wider. And if you don't like something, you can always undo it. Remember you have the undo keys up here. Let's zoom the whole design. And, that U is a little more over now, but, same thing, you would just go in and move that. And I'm not going to really worry about that right now. I'm just going to go ahead and generate that. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on here. There's push compensation, there's pull compensation. Don't worry about this, okay, because the push compensation of these stitches would fill that in. the pull compensation is going to suck that in a little bit. So this should line up probably perfectly. What you do need to worry about is, like I said, since we changed that, you might want to adjust how much overlap there is. So now let's talk about a stitching order. We get in the habit of things having to stitch in a certain order, or it's totally haphazard because you have trims. When the truth is, you really need to look at an efficient design. It saves you a lot of time. It saves your machine some wear and tear, not moving around. So if we look at how this should stitch, we can think logically, okay, we know these 3 letters are good, right? It's going to go C, L, and U. We would want the T to be on top, and we would want the E to be on top. But remember, the program recalculates your in and out points. So if I go up to my accessories and I say set my stitching order, I can say I want this to stitch first. I just left click that to stitch second. This to stitch third, fourth, and fifth. And then I would have to come back and get these 2. And, like I said, even if you have a trim, being logical is a good thing, but you can set this very quickly in accessories and then go to set stitching order and say, 1, 2, 3. I know that that's how I want those 3 to stitch. But, there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, if I have to take a trim, why not go over here and say U-R-E next, and then do that T last. You could do it that way. Or you could just simply do it, a whole completely different way. Think logically what has to go where. And if you go to accessories and say, okay, do the R, do the U, let's do the L, let's do the C, let's do this U, you're still going to end up with the same amount of jumps, the T and then the E. You can see they're all selected. When I press enter, it re-sequences those. Now, the beauty of this is no matter what logical way I set this, the program recalculates the in and out points here, so I have the least amount of trims. These 4 letters or these 5 letters will stitch without a trim. And then I will just come back and pick up the T and the E, which need to be on top. Now, we didn't deal with these colors underneath. They're pretty simple to do. We would just pick, create a rectangle and, come over here, and you want it to overlap a little or, be underneath that a little bit. So, you want to make a square, actually want to make a rectangle. So you would hold your control key as you drag that and just make a quick little rectangle. Change the color to, what color you need it to be. And I'm just going to kind of grab a blue color. That looks really like an awful green color. And then just come over here and right click and move it to the top. That's going to stitch first. And the same thing with the inside of the R in green. You would have to do that a little bit different. Follow my mouse, come over to your Create a Freehand Area tool, and, left click, make that first bar, left click across here, and then you're going to right click to make these curves, left click down here to stop curving, and as long as you start with the left click and end with the left click, you get a straight line segment in between. This doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be under the letters. And then, of course, change it to whatever color you want or whatever color you need. And you can move that to the top, or you can say move to position number 2. And those are quick ways to reset your stitching order. And then, of course, the big important thing to remember is to right-click off to the side and generate the entire design when you're done. I manually punched this, so I'm going to get rid of this image just by clicking on it, left-clicking and dragging it, and then I can just press the delete key and the image is gone. Then I'm going to move my mouse above the design and press and hold the left mouse button down and drag around this design. And you can see all of these little open boxes indicating multiple things are selected. I'm going to come down to my group icon and group those all together. Once they're grouped, I can resize them as a unit. If they're not grouped and I resize them, then I end up with a little bit of a mess, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay, before I go on, do you guys have any questions? Oh, to blend these in together. Okay, the question is there a way to make the corner of the T and the U look the same as the corner of the E or, the L, when you're coming into these bends, right? Because you can see that isn't quite blending quite as well as those do. And actually there is, and I'll show you that in a second. If I want this to stitch even better, and sometimes this isn't, you don't always get what you think you're going to get in this, but this is an option. If I right-click on this T, you've got, this L coming into the T, and then you've got the U to deal with, right? I'm going to zoom in, and we'll start with these letters. Okay, this is what, was asked. If I could make, this corner and this corner look like, the bend on the L. And the answer is I can. So I'm going to start with the L. I'm going to right-click on this L. I'm going to hold my Control key, and I'm going to right-click on that T, and I'm going to select them both. Now, if you have something that you can't get to by right-clicking on it, then come over to your Stitch Sequence Viewer and left-click on it. Hold your Control key, and left-click on the next letter that you want to look at. Okay, in that case, it selected the L and the T again, and then we're going to work on the U. Go up to your View Outline. That puts it into outline mode. That allows you to change the shape of an outline. So, you're changing something, you're changing the shape, you're not changing stitch direction, you're changing shape. So that's how you remember outline. Now, in the outline menu, which you can get from here, here's your outline menu up here, or you can right-click here and use this option, Merge. Now, what Merge is going to do is going to take these two letters and merge them together. Most of the time it does a very good job, but sometimes, like I'm looking at this and that's not quite perfectly aligned, I may have to edit a little bit after I merge. So I'm going to merge them. And you can see, even though that was a little bit off down there, it blended them together very well. Now, I'm still in satin, and since I really want to see what this did, I'm going to go ahead and generate. And you can see what it did there. I've now blended that so that that flows very well around that corner. Now, the next corner would be this corner. So I'm going to leave this section selected. I'm going to hold my Control key and right-click on that U. Then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go into my View Outline, right-click, and merge. And then I'm going to go ahead and generate and see what happened. So now I've been able to merge those three letters together. I could keep going, and now that's selected, hold my Control key, and I can merge this R together too. Go to View Outline, right-click, merge. Okay, now I'm going to kind of zoom out so you can see the whole design and generate. You can see those did very well when I merged them together, but now my stitching order is a little off, but not a big deal, right? Now you could press your luck and see how much more you could merge together, and if you're going to do that, I suggest you save your original file and go to File, Save As, and I'm just going to type in Culture IDS. So there is, what I've gotten merged so far. Now, let's see how far we can push this, because we have an undo option. So we've merged this piece. So let's go for broke and hold the Control key and right-click on the E. Right-click, go into View Outline, and then right-click and say Merge. And then, check this, because you might want to undo that. I wouldn't leave it like this because I really don't like the way that looks. So undo it. Just, come up to your undo option, click on that little black arrow next to it, and undo the merge. Go back to the merge. So now that's undone, and I can generate. I can see what happens when I use the U and this as well. If you have to take a couple of steps, no biggie. You're just going to undo it, right? So see, when you get into those curving shapes, it's a little harder to blend that outline together. Undo it. So now what I have is a pretty decent looking design, but I'm going to want to resequence this, right? No problem. Quickest way is go to accessories, set stitching order. We know that the C is definitely going first. Well, or it could be the other section that goes first, but then I can come over here and say, do this whole section. Do the E and then do the U. And that's going to stitch first. And these two pieces, real quick, I would just hold, the control key, select them both. Let me undo. Sorry, I didn't mean to hit the rainbow. Hold the control key, select them both, right click, move to the top, right click off to the side, and generate. So now I've got, a little more efficient design. And let's go to 101 so I see what size it is. Now I have to resize everything. So I'm going to, make sure everything's grouped, left click and drag around it. We grouped it previously. I have no little inside boxes. And remember I told you you want to group so that you can resize efficiently. So I'm going to ungroup mine and show you what happens. If I select everything and I haven't grouped it and I say, let's resize, because, follow my mouse, that's your resize icon. Let's resize this 4 inches. That's about 100 millimeters, right? That resized pretty well together, but sometimes it doesn't. So you are better off if you group this together and resize it, because if you happen to have to nudge it a little bit like that, see what happens? You did all that work of lining it up and making sure everything lined up. Take that extra step, left click, hold that left mouse button down, drag around it, group it, and then resize it. Now I'm going to take this down to 100 millimeters. I'm going to make sure nothing is selected with the right click, and if you want to be safe, make sure nothing's selected at all, and I'm going to regenerate the entire design. That's about 4 inches, a little less than 4 inches. And that would stitch very nicely. And if you want to see what it's going to stitch like, go to, right next to this little film strip, which, by the way, if you're missing that bar, that turns that on and off. Right next to your 3D is a little black triangle. That's a stitch player. When I click on that, I can play through the design, and I can watch. There's what the underlay is going to do. This is what the top stitch is going to look like. If I want to speed it up, if you click on any of these, like 1,000 would just be blink and you're done. But if I click on 10 and come over here and hit the fast forward, that speeds that up significantly. And I can kind of bounce between these to see what's going on. But, if I want to make sure that my underlay is what I want it to be, I might not quite go with the quick autoplay. I might slow it down. But if I want to slow it down after I get to a certain point, I can just double click on it, or click on it again, I guess, to turn it off, and come over here and pick the slower play. But that gives you an idea of how things are going to stitch, and you can double check things if you want. The stitch playthrough is pretty accurate, and so you have an idea of what's going to happen. And a lot of times, once you get comfortable with the software and you know how these are going to behave, how the stitch is going to behave, how that merge is going to happen, like, I knew which letters I could pretty much merge. I knew that those curves weren't going to, and you'll know those things once you've played with the software a little bit more. Then you may be able to use that stitch player to play through before you do a test stitch on anything, because, with you guys, time is of the essence. So now I want to get out of the stitch player, so I'm going to just come back and click on this triangle. And I'm back in my design, and I need to save this and make sure, in case I need to make changes, or my customer comes back next week and says, oh, hey, by the way, add Joe's name underneath here. I need to go to File, Save, or Save As, and, give it a name. I mean, we named this Culture IDS. I'm going to go ahead and just resave it over Culture IDS. Now I need to send it out to my machine. So I'm going to go up to Export, click on that arrow, and there's Export To, which gives me DST. But then there's Export to my machine, my embroidery machine directly, which if you are connected with the USB, you can. If I had multiple designs open, I could do the batch export. But in this case, I'm going to Export To. I'm going to name this Culture and select where I want this design to go. So I'm going to go ahead and just, save it, Culture IDS, I'll name it again. It's not going to save in the IDS format. It's going to save in DST. And I just save it. And now it's ready to stitch. I'm going to go ahead and I saved this file. I exported it out to my machine. And those of you who, need to set your colors, you can go up to File and you can print your worksheet. I'm going to do a print preview and we'll talk about this real quick as well. I didn't do this in the previous one, but this is kind of an important thing. Okay, here's my design. Here's my colors. You go out to DST. DST does not actually have any color setting. DST looks at a trim or a stop as a color change. Boom. I think the colors for DST are like black, navy blue, lime green. They're really not thread colors. And if you are used to looking at thread colors, like when you look at this design, that kind of throws you sometimes. So it's a good idea until you get kind of used to the fact there's three colors, it's blue, green, and gray. But when you look at it in DST, it could come out with like two different blacks, right? So do this, print your sheet. There's all this information in here. You don't necessarily need all of this unless you want it. You can remove these check marks, but you don't even necessarily need the print crosshairs or this design placement. What you need is the color chart. And if you have a design like that dinosaur design I showed you with 73 some colors, you're going to want to click these. But in most cases, you're going to try not to have a design like that. And I'm just going to hit preview so you can see this on my screen, but you would hit print. And what it does is it prints out your color list. It also prints what colors, like by section. When you open this on your machine, it's not going to show you these colors in most cases. Depends on your machine. So this is a good idea. If these are the colors your customer wants, it's a good idea to know that, yeah, that's the section that's going to be blue, that's going to be green, and just print that off so you have it on hand. And you can put all kinds of information in here if you really need to.